I was 22 when this happened, fresh out of college, between jobs, doing whatever work I could find around town, babysitting, cleaning, errands, anything that paid cash. A woman I dog sat for once recommended me to a man named Craig. He said he'd be out of town for a week and needed someone to stay at his house to look after his golden retriever, Max. He told me Max was anxious, that he did better when someone actually stayed overnight. The pay was good, better than usual, so I agreed. Craig met me 2 days later. Late 40s, wire-rimmed glasses, windbreaker. He seemed ordinary, polite, maybe a little too friendly, but harmless. His house sat at the edge of town, tucked behind a line of woods, quiet. The kind of quiet that feels heavier at night. Inside, everything looked clean but dated. Beige carpet, floral curtains, the faint smell of old air freshener that never really goes away. He walked me through the routine, when to feed Max, where the spare key was, which food I could use from the fridge. He said I could sleep in the guest room on the first floor, right off the living room. I started that Monday. The first 2 nights were normal. I'd watch TV, take Max for his evening walk, then lock up and sleep with him curled at the foot of the bed. He snored softly, comforting somehow. But the 3rd night, everything changed. I was sitting on the bed, scrolling through my phone, when I noticed something on the dresser. A digital alarm clock. It stood out, newer, black plastic, blue LED numbers. Everything else in the room looked frozen in time, early 2000s maybe. I don't know why I looked closer. Maybe the way the lamp's light hit it. But when I leaned in, I saw it. A tiny round hole above the numbers. A pinhole. At first, I thought it was just a sensor. Then I realized the angle. It was pointed straight at the bed. My stomach sank. I'd read about hidden cameras and clocks. Never thought I'd actually see one. I picked it up. It was heavier than I expected. I heard a faint buzzing inside, like a small fan. That's when Max lifted his head and started whining. Not at me, at something else. From deeper inside the house, I heard it. A door closing. Not the front door. Somewhere in the hallway. Every hair on my body stood up. Craig wasn't supposed to be back until Sunday. It was Wednesday night. I froze, still holding the clock. My heartbeat filled the silence. Then, footsteps. Soft, slow ones, on the carpet outside the room. I set the clock down quietly, went to the door, and locked it. The footsteps stopped. Then came his voice. Craig's. Calm at first, but slightly out of breath. He said he'd forgotten something inside and needed me to open the door. I couldn't move. He paused, then told me it wasn't what I thought. Said the clock was a motion sensor for the dog, that he hadn't mentioned it because he didn't want to freak me out. His tone changed as he kept talking. The calmness drained from it. He told me to open the door so we could talk like adults. I didn't answer. Then the knocking started. Sharp, fast. Max began barking, jumping at the door. Craig's voice turned angry, shouting now, demanding I open up, threatening to call the cops and say I'd broken in. My hand shook as I fumbled with the window latch. It was low enough to climb out, but stuck. I forced it open after a few tries. Behind me, his pounding grew louder. I didn't wait. I pushed the window open, climbed out, and dropped into the damp grass. I ran through the side yard, down the gravel driveway, until my lungs burned. The only sound behind me was Max barking from inside the house. I reached the road and hid behind a row of mailboxes, shaking, watching the house through the trees. I called my mom. She lived 15 minutes away. I told her to come get me. By the time her headlights appeared, I was still crouched behind those mailboxes, convinced Craig was somewhere in the woods watching. I stayed with her that night, didn't sleep. Every noise made me jump. The next morning, I blocked Craig's number and called a lawyer. He told me without proof, no recordings, no photos, there wasn't much anyone could do. Even if the clock was a hidden camera, Craig could claim it was harmless. My lawyer advised me not to go back, so I didn't. Craig never paid me. The woman who'd recommended me stopped replying. I never found out if she knew anything. For weeks, I kept dreaming of that room, the clock on the dresser, that soft buzzing sound, the door closing somewhere behind me. I started checking everything in my apartment after that. Clocks, smoke detectors, picture frames, anything that looked slightly out of place. I couldn't help it. That fear doesn't really leave you. Sometimes, when I think about that night, I wonder if he'd ever left at all. If maybe he'd been in the house the whole time, watching me through that little black lens. I booked the Airbnb in late September, just a week before my girlfriend Emma and I planned to visit her sister, a quiet town about 3 hours away. I picked it because it was cheap, had good reviews, and looked cozy in the photos. An old 2-story house with a wraparound porch, warm yellow lighting, and hardwood floors that gave it a kind of storybook charm. There was only one small note in the description: basement storage room off limits. I'd seen that before. Most owners keep personal stuff locked away, so I didn't think twice. But when we pulled into the driveway that first evening, the place looked different, older, weathered. The trees around it stood close, and there was only one other house in sight, far down the road. The host, Alan, was already waiting on the porch before we even parked. He was tall but slightly hunched, late 50s maybe. His gray hair was neatly combed, and his shirt was tucked in too perfectly. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was the kind of smile people practice. When we shook hands, his grip lingered just a moment too long. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and candle wax. The hallway walls were yellowed, the light dim. The house wasn't dirty, just old. He gave us a quick tour. The living room had a big couch facing an old television. The kitchen was tidy but dated, the kind of place where everything works, but nothing feels new. Upstairs, there was one bedroom, one bath. The ceiling fan creaked when it spun. Then we went back down. Alan stopped by a door near the kitchen and tapped the heavy padlock hanging from it. He said firmly that this door stayed locked. It was his storage space. We had no reason to go down there, no smile this time, just that flat stare. After that, he wished us a pleasant stay and walked out the front door. Emma and I unpacked, made tea, and sat outside for a while. The porch overlooked a patch of woods, and at first the quiet felt peaceful. But by the time we went to bed, that same silence had started to feel wrong. No traffic, no wind, just the faint ticking of a wall clock downstairs. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a dull thud from below us. It lasted half a second, then silence again. I told myself it was the house settling, or maybe pipes shifting. I fell back asleep. The next morning, we went into town. Breakfast, coffee, sightseeing. It was nice, normal. We stayed out until dark, then came back and watched a movie before bed. That night, around 2 a.m., I woke again. I heard it clearly this time. A dragging sound, something heavy being pulled across a rough floor. It came from the basement. I sat up, listened. The sound stopped, then started again. 5 seconds. Pause. Another 5. Emma stirred beside me and whispered, "You hear that?" I said yes. We both lay still, staring at the ceiling. It stopped eventually, and somehow we fell asleep. The next night, it came back. Worse. This time, footsteps. Slow, uneven. 4 steps. Pause. Then 3 more. Each pause long enough to make you think whoever was down there was listening. Emma whispered again, saying she heard breathing between the steps. I told her not to talk, not to move. We stayed frozen until dawn. By morning, the house felt heavier. The air itself seemed thicker. We still went out that day, but both of us felt off, like the silence of the place was following us. When we came back that afternoon, I walked straight to the basement door. The padlock was still on, but when I leaned close, I smelled something faint, like damp air mixed with rot. I told myself I was imagining it. That night, the noises started earlier, around midnight. A faint metallic tapping, then those same footsteps, stopping and starting, for nearly an hour. Neither of us spoke. We just waited for morning. By the 4th night, we were both exhausted. While getting ready for bed, Emma stopped brushing her hair and pointed up at the smoke detector above the bed. She asked if it looked strange. At first, I didn't see it, but when I stood on the bed for a closer look, I froze. In the middle of the plastic, there was a small black circle, too perfect to be part of the design. I climbed up with a chair, unscrewed it, and inside was a camera, a tiny one, with a green light glowing faintly. Emma went pale. I searched the room, the dresser, the walls, the corners. Found another camera, behind a pinhole near the mirror, aimed directly at the bed. We didn't speak after that. We just packed, shoved everything into our bags, and left. At a gas station miles away, we called the police. 2 officers met us there, and we told them everything. The noises, the cameras, the locked basement. They followed us back to the house. When we got there, the front door was unlocked. The air inside felt stale, cold. We showed them the cameras first. They collected them, every piece of equipment they could find. Then we showed them the basement door. It was open. Wide open. The padlock dangled from one hinge. The stairway below was pitch black. We told the officers that door had always been locked, that the host had warned us not to go down there. They went down with flashlights. A few seconds later, we heard shouting, the sound of boots on concrete. Then one of them called out to the other. Something heavy fell, then silence. When they came back up, they weren't alone. They had Alan. He'd been hiding in a closet in the basement. Inside that closet was a monitor showing live feeds from multiple cameras. Not just the bedroom, the living room, the hallway, even the bathroom. The officers arrested him right there. They said he'd been watching us the entire time. He was charged with trespassing and invasion of privacy. Airbnb reached out later, offered us a voucher. Their way of keeping us quiet, I guess. We took it, but it didn't fix anything. That night left something in both of us. Even now, months later, we don't rent Airbnbs anymore. Not after knowing that for 4 nights. We slept above a man hiding in the dark, watching, listening, waiting for something only he understood. When I first moved into that apartment, I wasn't looking for much. Just something quiet, close to work, and cheap enough to manage on my own. It was an old building, the kind that always smelled faintly of metal and dust. The landlord told me the place had character. That usually means it's falling apart. Still, it wasn't bad. 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, and windows that looked out over a parking lot filled with tired cars. I couldn't afford it alone, so I put out an ad for a roommate. A few days later, a guy named Kevin replied. Said he worked nights at a hospital, wasn't home much, didn't make noise. That sounded perfect. He came by to look at the place one afternoon. Tall, thin, maybe in his early 30s. His clothes looked clean but worn, and he spoke softly, polite but distant. He didn't ask many questions, just looked around, nodded, and said he'd move in that weekend. When he did, everything seemed fine. He kept his room tidy, paid rent on time, and mostly stayed out of the way. For the first week, I barely saw him. He'd leave around sunset and come back early in the morning. I'd hear the front door open just before dawn, then his footsteps crossing the hall to his room. Sometimes I'd wake up to the sound of his shower running, then silence again. But after a while, things started to feel off. It began with small things. My cereal box half empty when I hadn't touched it. The bathroom mirror fogged up even though I hadn't showered yet. Footsteps in the hallway when I thought he was at work. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe I'd eaten more than I remembered. Maybe the building creaked. But one night I woke up to the sound of something clicking in the kitchen. Not a loud noise, just a steady, rhythmic tapping. I checked the clock, 2:47 a.m. Kevin should have been at work. I got up quietly and walked to the door. The apartment was dark, except for the faint orange glow from the streetlight outside. The tapping stopped. I stood there, listening. After a few seconds, I heard a low hum, like someone whispering to themselves. It came from the kitchen. I called his name softly. No answer. When I turned the corner, the kitchen was empty, but one of the chairs was pulled slightly away from the table. And on the table, my phone was sitting, unlocked. I hadn't left it there. When I picked it up, the screen showed my photo gallery. Someone had been scrolling through my pictures. That's when I realized something was wrong. The next morning, Kevin was in his room with the door closed. I knocked, but he didn't answer. Later that night, I saw him leaving again for work. He nodded at me, same polite smile, same quiet voice. But this time, I noticed something new. His right hand was bandaged. He caught me looking and said, "Cut myself on some glass at work." Then he walked out. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the phone, about how he must have come into my room. Around 3 in the morning, I heard the door open again. His usual time coming home. Footsteps down the hall, the sound of his door closing. I almost felt relieved. But the next morning, when I checked the hallway, his shoes weren't there. His jacket wasn't on the hook. I realized he hadn't come home at all. So who had opened the door? That day, I texted him, asking if he'd come back late last night. He replied hours later, saying no, he'd stayed at the hospital for an extra shift. I didn't reply. I spent the whole day tense, waiting for night. When darkness finally came, I locked my door, turned off the lights, and sat awake in bed, listening. It was after 2 when I heard it again, slow footsteps in the hallway. I held my breath. They stopped right outside my door. Silence. Then the faint sound of breathing. I could hear it clearly, low, slow breaths just inches away. After what felt like minutes, the footsteps moved again, but not away. They turned toward the living room, then the creak of the front door, then nothing. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I called the landlord, told him I needed to check something. He met me that afternoon with a spare key to Kevin's room. When we opened it, the first thing I noticed was the smell, stale, sour, like old clothes left in the rain. The room was empty. No bed, no suitcase, no clothes, just bare floors and walls. There was only one thing inside, a small stack of photos on the windowsill. I picked them up, They were all pictures of me, sleeping, eating, sitting at my desk. Some were from angles that could only have been taken from inside my room. The landlord looked pale. He said Kevin's real name wasn't in the system, that he'd paid cash. I called the police. They searched the apartment but found nothing else. No fingerprints, no records, nothing. It was like he'd never existed. A few days later, the detective called me. Said the prints from the photos matched a man named Kevin Rourke, a former hospital janitor. He'd been fired months ago for stealing medication, and before that, he'd been evicted from another apartment 2 towns over. His roommate there had filed a restraining order, said Kevin had been watching him sleep. The detective told me they hadn't found him yet. That was over a year ago. I moved out right after that. Didn't even pack half my stuff. Sometimes I still wake up at 2:47. The exact time I first heard that sound in the kitchen. I'll lie there, listening, waiting, and sometimes I think I hear it again. A soft, steady tapping. Like someone scrolling through a phone that isn't theirs.